everything's just so simple. It's so simple yet insane. The goal for this car is a street car, to drive to Cars and Coffee, make 4-rotor noises. We're not trying to build a Le Mans 787B FD RX7. LS swap subframe for an RX7 FD. So you can see the LS mounts right here. The rack on this subframe is about an inch lower than stock. So they make little spacers and adapters to be able to raise the rack back up. Yes, lowering the rack is going to affect the steering geometry, but lowering it this much is not uncommon in the world of FD. So we're going to start there. So where we're at right now, I've got engine mounts built. It's on a Ronin subframe. I've got the radiator positioned where it needs to go. And we're working on putting this amazingly beautiful header system together. So we've got one header laying in here. Calvin's working on some V-band flanges. And this, some sort of way, all 4 of these equal length tubes fit on this engine. We did not build these headers. Logan at Defined Autoworks built these headers. He's got these super trick flanges you put on the engine. V-band clamps right on the engine. Each runner goes on individually so that you're not putting some ginormous piece of stainless steel on the car all at one time. Working with Saki Bomb Garage right back here to run their new dual thermostatic smart oil coolers on the 4-rotor. It is exhaust time for the 4-rotor. So we've got a bunch, 3.5 stainless steel tubing here, 1 vibrant muffler, a vibrant resonator. Hopefully we can give this thing a nice deep tone, but not exactly ear-piercingly uncomfortable to drive. You still got to know that this is a 4-rotor, so we can't have this thing sounding like a stock RX-8 or basically a Prius because they're the same thing. So we've got to make this thing sound crispy. You can see what I've got laying out right here is what is currently not under the car. Well, I had initially told Johnny when I was going to build this exhaust, I was going to try to fit as many mufflers under here as possible. But once you start looking at 3.5-inch mufflers, 3.5 inches, that's a lot of pipe under there. It's very big. Sometimes 3.5 is all you can fit. You guys have all been waiting for the intake manifold, or at least most of it. So this is the custom built by Defined Autoworks super trick 4-rotor slide throttle intake manifold. This thing, we got to get it mounted up. We've got to get a whole bunch of other stuff mounted to this engine so that I can locate the remote oil filter and proceed to run all the plumbing. This is a big piece in running the plumbing. I've got to add 2 little bosses so that I can put a port on 2 of these runners. These runners are not connected at all, nor will they be. So it's just 4 individual rotor runners. Say that 5 times fast. But I need those bosses so I can hook up the brake booster because we're a street car and we want brake booster. So this piece, y'all can just watch the christening moment right here. Dun, 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 dun. Look at that intake manifold. The thing that does stink, though, is it's going to hide all the pretty tubular work of these sweet headers. So I've only got 2 of them on there now because I took some of y'all's advice and kind of my advice, a compromise between the 2, and I'm putting O2 sensor bungs in the rotor 3 and the rotor 4 header. So we'll be able to check the variation in fuel consumption between secondary port front iron and a small port center iron, and then also a 2 small port center iron rotor situation. So if you remember, the front rotor and the rear rotor, they have a front and a rear iron, so the ports are bigger, the secondary ports. We don't have primary and secondary staging, but I'm going to call them secondary ports because on a typical 2-rotor, the outer ports are your secondaries. They open up on the secondary. This intake manifold, super cinematic, it comes off. Let's find a place to sit it. I've painted too many cars too nice, and I can't set this down on the hood of a car. We can put it on the hood of the rally car. I don't think it's going to hurt it that much. Be gentle. It's a 77 Dodge Colt rally car. So this intake manifold counters or tries to account for the fact that the primary center iron ports are small and the outer secondary front and rear iron ports are large. Now you're just looking at this and you're going, well, it's not countering anything because all of these ports are the exact same. And that's how we're trying to restrict the airflow into the front iron and into the rear iron so that we can have a better equilibrium of fuel consumption, just equal consumption between all of the rotors on this. We're only going to have those O2 sensors in those headers just while we're dyno tuning it, just to check everything. There's one O2 sensor that's going to be back at the collector where all the 3.5-inch stuff goes before the resonator, literally behind the transmission. So that should get us a good overall reading. If we see any weird discrepancies, we'll account for it. But then ultimately, guys, it's street car. We're not going to be sitting in here dialing this thing in the timing and trying to make this thing run like, you know, let's see, what would a 400 horsepower FD RX7 probably run in the quarter mile? Drop it in the comment below. Maybe this 4-rotor car, granny shifting a stock FD trans. I'm going to bet like a 13. Probably a 13. Maybe a 12.5. I'd bet a 12.5 maybe. 12.58. Shot in the dark. But we're not going to be dialing, we're not going to be pushing this engine that hard. So we just want to check it to make sure we're not outside of our limits of running correctly and properly and healthily. And then we'll take those O2 sensors off and go. So intake manifold is here. I got to clean this little duct tape residue off. And then we're going to slap the intake on with a couple bolts. I got these studs here on the front iron for the stock water pump assembly. So I'm going to getting ready to drop that on there so I can figure out where the alternator goes, which is going to be over here. And then ultimately I can figure out where my remote oil filter is going to go. So this deal, talked about it in the previous video, is kind of the key to our success here. I'm thinking about putting this thing over here. So I've got an in, an out, an in, and an out, just 2 straight through passageways. Pretty typical for one of these. This is just an Earl's, you know, Summit brand, which you can get remote oil filter mount for the giant small block Chevy oil filters. Lots of flow. I like that these threaded inserts are already on the frame rail here, so I think I'm going to make a bracket that holds this right about here. It's going to interfere, obviously, with this air conditioner line where it comes out, but we can always run the air conditioner line back down behind it or bend that line a little bit. I think the factory line would have just came straight up here and went right around the radiator and to the front to the condenser. But I'm thinking this is where this is going to go. Yeah, it's a little close to the exhaust. Not too stoked for that. We can build a heat shield around it. I can move it up a little bit, but then when you change your oil, you're going to drain oil all over your radiator, and that's just no bueno. We don't want that. I thought about trying to put it over here, but you're going to see in a second when I put the AC compressor, power steering pump, and like this whole front accessory drive on, that we're going to run out of room over there too. So the other place I could put it is like back here, but then it just gets really hard to change if I put it back there. Really focus on serviceability when you guys are building your cars. Like, make it easy for you or your mechanic to work on it if you're the one building it. Save you the headache in the future. So we got to locate this, but first, accessories. Y'all see how complicated this engine bay is going to get really quick. And then, because we have all of our constraints, we have everything we need for this whole entire system, the coolers, the radiator, the other cooler, the block off at the back from Franklin Performance in New Zealand. We've got all of our other lines and fittings on the engine. We can hook up our fuel feed in return. We're pretty much ready to, like, you know, dial in all the plumbing. We know where everything goes. Now we just got to connect all the right spots to the right spot. So let's get after it. I've got to pull this bolt out for this little block off shield because that is that bolt hole right there. Wonderful. I probably ought to just trim that shield so it doesn't go behind the intake manifold. That would probably be less than ideal. Just remember, guys, you just got to imagine beautiful cinematography going on with this. This is a beautiful piece. It deserves greatness. Oh, this flange is thinner than the studs. Look at that. Looking nice. Am I really going to have to remove this fuse block to get this thing on here? No shot. That's real. Alright, well that's a real thing. Got to take this off so I can fit that. You know, it's a whole extra engine further forward in here now. Alright, there we go. Bada bing, bada boom. Nailed it. The custom thermostat cover and cap assembly, that's getting welded as well with the rest of the exhaust and the other header, so we'll have that back in the next video. Got a few ports I got to block off down here though, and this one here, the heater hose, connects back to that one, so we'll have to get a length of hose to be able to connect that to that, which is also going to kind of interfere with wherever our remote oil filter goes. It's getting pretty busy in here, isn't it, guys? Let's just make it more busy. The old power steering. Alright, so that's just hanging in there loosely. Y'all see any issues arising just yet? I'm curious. Hopefully that alternator fits in here and doesn't interfere with the intake. We'll find out here in about 4 seconds flat. Woo! Well, that's a problem. That isn't going to work because I'm hitting this. Just street car, we definitely need an alternator. I guess I could try to just put it right here in the top and see if it clears the hood. I just didn't think it would at all. It sticks up a little higher than this. So for now, I guess we're going to set it in the center. When Calvin comes out and puts the front clip on, we can test fit the hood with the alternator there and make sure that it fits or if it doesn't. But we will be the first to know in that video when we get this on here. But this is not ideal. Here's your direct comparison of the top mount alternator versus some assemblage of a side mount alternator. So yeah, we got that going for us, which is nice. The one thing that sucks though is like we don't want to sacrifice air conditioning or power steering for the sake of the alternator, right? Even though we could do like a side mount alternator over here, we'd probably have to go to like an electric water pump and get some sort of custom bracket to put it over here. Fortunately, my coolant thermostat sticks out far enough that this should fit just fine. Like it's, you know, it's out about that far before it comes down. For that reason, we might have to figure something out. You see, the issue is that this plane right here, the back of this tab, is the same as the back of the alternator mount here. So I would have to make a spacer for the thickness of this versus the thickness of the alternator one. You know, an FD alternator on an FD, no spacer required. Some of the first gens have the little spacers in there, second gens. But that looks like a whole load of fun to try to figure out now. I'm curious whenever we get the slides, how much of this, you know, is actually needed. You see kind of right through there. If I could take a ½ inch off of that or so, that would probably get me the clearance that I need. But I'd be curious, even if I went that much lower, how I would get a belt to it. So, which even just going to this location of an alternator, you know, getting a belt over here is going to be a bit tricky. And I wasn't really counting on just being able to use this water pump pulley. So this one rides on the back of the belt, right? So your normal pulley routing, like if we were just leaving it like this, it would go around here, it would touch the side of this, go over that. You just have a real short belt in there. Not the best setup for high RPM because this will end up doing a burnout on the belt. But if we put the alternator over here, then the belt's going to come down around the bottom of this, around the alternator, and I was going to run it under this pulley and around the crank pulley. So the belts will probably be really close together right here. But that would give you a better drive on either the back side of this as a smooth pulley, or you can find I think this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a 5-rib pulley. We could find like a 5-rib generic water pump pulley for one of these probably, and put that on there, and then the belt could come over the top of this if need be, but under this, up and over, back around was going to be my solution. Whenever I was eyeing it up before, it should all lay out properly like that with good engagement on everything. I really think this side mount alternator though has got to be the way to go. There's no way it fits. It's a whole 3 inches higher than the air pump ear right here. Everything is coming together, guys, except for one slight hiccup, which is going to be an easy fix to some extent. Slight miscommunication, but we'll get it all dialed. So with the intake manifold here, as you saw me hang the alternator just a second ago and go, holy cow, that's really close. So as it turns out, the slide throttles that Defined Autoworks has made to mount to this plate actually extend past this aluminum plate about 1.25 inches. So 1.25 inches forward. As you can see, my alternator is very much 0.0 inches away from this. So we've reached a little bit of a conundrum, and there's really not another good option to move the alternator around, okay? So I'd really like to keep the factory power steering and air conditioner bracket. We could probably go to an electric power steering, like shaft-mounted electric power steering under the dash, and get rid of this, and then put the alternator over here on the right and do some sort of a custom bracket. But that does like very much so complicate this whole thing, and definitely not get all of that done before Tail of the Dragon, literally in 8 days. So what I'm thinking, because I've got to take this intake manifold to my TIG welder fabricator guy, is I think we might modify the intake manifold a little bit. So, you know, this was built based off of Logan's 4 rotor, which doesn't have an alternator in this location. So it should work, right? For us, obviously the alternator's here. So what I'm thinking, these holes are 2-inch. So I'm going to order some 2-inch aluminum tubing. And I think what I want to do, I got to wait for the slides to get here, and the little trumpets that wrap over from the slide, they're kind of rolled. But I think what we're going to do is I'm going to take this manifold off next week. You guys are going to see it in one of these videos, and probably going to chop this flange off the manifold and relocate it, you know, put some tube work on here to have, it's kind of going to look a little funny, I guess, because it needs to just like, needs to be further away from my alternator. That's the easiest thing. It just needs to be further away from the alternator. I really don't want to like remake the whole thing. You know, ideally in a perfect world, the sexiest way to complete this change would be to cut this apart and take each one of these runners here and just roll them all to the left a little bit. And what that would do is that would take this and move it back. You know, I got plenty of room back here for that, you know, 1.5 inch overhang, but I have no room right here. There's definitely no way, as you saw, that a top mount alternator works. I just don't think that that clears the hood at all. I mean, we can try it, but it just sticks up so far. So Calvin's going to be out here in the next video putting the front clip on this car. Johnny's going to be here, the owner of the car, to see it. We'll be able to get his reaction to seeing his car like, you know, completely transformed from what it was when it was just the 2-rotor to what it is now, which is a 4-rotor street car in the making. Always some sort of an issue, and unfortunately, getting the intake manifold this late in the build, kind of, we'll push it in the trailer and push it out, but that's okay. We want to get this thing to where, aside from a couple small bits with the cooling system and one line for my power steering, roll through all the oil and fuel system stuff that we've got done. We'll just start at the very start, the front iron right here. Oil is coming out of your front iron on rotary engines. This is where high pressure oil comes from. It comes right out of here. This line runs over to the driver's side cooler, into the driver's side cooler, through the fancy thermostat if it turns on, out of the driver's side cooler, and we're going back across behind the radiator. That's this line right here. So I left enough slack in here that my fans will fit under it, and this line is going to be affixed to the back of the fans. So it shouldn't move or do anything crazy, have a little jump rope dance party down here, you know? It goes over here through this cooler. Thermostat magic happens, cooler comes on, comes out of the cooler, and goes in to our remote oil filter. It's a little close to the exhaust, but that's okay. There's a nice little bolt here for the intake manifold flange, and the bolts down here for the front cover. The turbo drain is that I can make a heat shield for this to try to keep the heat off the oil filter. I don't really think it's going to be that big of a deal. Like I said, this is not a track car. It's just a street car. It's not going to get that hot. From the remote oil filter mount, we have 2 outs. Big dash 10 out and the small dash 6 out. The dash 10 out runs all the way around the front of the engine bay to the rear iron to the Franklin Performance piece where it feeds oil in and then goes through the Franklin Performance piece and feeds both of the ports on the rear iron. So we're running down to our pressure regulator to bleed pressure off, and then from there we're also running up out of the rear iron and around to the front iron. This dash 6 line right here is its own separate feed, and it comes up, hits the front center bearing and the rear center bearing, and that's the only 2 things that go to that. The reason for having that separate line that's super long, honestly, it could have been shorter. I could have simply teed it in back here and brought that up and then went over here and terminated it. But I really want those 2 center bearings to have priority and get good clean oil from the filter as efficiently as possible. So if you can imagine teeing in back here where this dash 10 line is, all the oil is going to have to go through that dash 10 line. Now I get it. It's 1 dash 10 out of the front of the engine, through the coolers to the filter. That's okay. The filter might be some sort of restriction. After the filter, I want full free flow into this engine. So that's why there's an extra dash 6. A little bit overkill, probably, but we really don't want to burn this motor up. So I think that's going to be just fine. You can see this lower line right here runs under the fuel rails. It comes up to the front iron. So that's the rear iron to front iron, kind of redundant recirculation. Overkill, I know, but worth it to not burn up a 4-rotor. The fuel system, stock FD, feed and return. And y'all may think this is cheesy, but I've got the braided 3/8-6A in line, hose clamped to the feed and to the return line. So that braided line is a royal pain in the butt to get onto those steel lines. I like to put 2 hose clamps on it really close together. It's how this car is. It's how that car is. It's how the truck has been for years. Just been doing it that way. You could get these fancy aluminum connector things that slide onto hardline and it compression fits them, and then you have a dash 6AN like fitting, but that's an extra fitting. You're still doing the same thing, just metal to metal versus rubber to metal with the hose clamps. So I was like, well, we're just going to roll with the hose clamps. It's one less place to leak. So from here, the feed line comes up, which is on your FD. It is the furthest right fuel line. That's your feed line. So the feed line comes up over here. It parallels the oil line. I like things that line up. Comes down, runs through the rail, through the rail, through the rail, up to here. Pulsation dampener, pressure regulator, and then it comes out of the pressure regulator and runs right down to the return line. Very simple system. I'm stoked with how everything's laid out because I really, like I mentioned just a second ago, like things that are parallel and line up. So you can see here, look at this. It goes right in line. So it doesn't look like there's just a giant mess of fuel lines running there. Everything is well oriented and planned. In addition, I'm going to run the alternator wiring, which is right here. And I need the stock AC and power steering. This is just like, I think your low power steering sensor light or something, I guess. I don't know, but there's a wire in the factory harness for both of these. Both of those wires, you know, if this whole system was back here, it would line up perfectly with where they come out of the factory harness. So the AC here, the power steering connector right there. So what I'm going to do is extend the alternator, the power steering, the AC, all of this stuff from this charge harness over here on the fender apron. We're going to extend that around the back of the coil. I'm going to come down here on the intake manifold side, run that wire down. So my thick wire will go to my alternator to charge right here. The alternator turn on, excite wires will go to the alternator there. And then those 2 wires for the AC and power steering will come across the front of the engine and go to here. So there shouldn't be any extra stuff in this hole right here. It's literally going to look just as clean as what you see it until we add the catch can, which is going to have to go from this port to this port, and somewhere in here will be a catch can. Probably just somewhere up here, somewhere simple. But the goal is nice and open, easy to service the spark plugs, easy to check the oil, easy to look at. You know, this is a stock FD power steering line, unmodified, and it still reaches. It's not even in that crazy of a bind, you know? It's a little tight, but it's not that bad down here. So that's your stock power steering line for the plumbing there. I've got to hook up the low pressure side of the power steering down to the rack. Do we need the stock little cooler loop or not? I don't know. I'm going to see if I can fit it in there easily in front of the radiator or somewhere. Once I get the bumper on, it's probably like, I probably ought to try to put it in there before I put the bumper on, so maybe we'll look at that here in a second. But the stock power steering cooler could go in there, or we could just hook it back up. Like I said, it's not a race car. I don't think we're really going to be stressing out the power steering system that much, that it's going to be getting that hot, overheating. So it would probably be okay to just not have the like extra loop of cooler to go back to this. You know, the system might want that extra volume in there. You know, taking that out, you reduce the volume, but more volume means easier to stay cool as well. Hose clamp your heater core line to the back of the... So I've got to put that piece on. That'll be here. I'm going to go ahead and just pull all of those steel fittings out, drill them and tap them. The only one that I'm going to have to just block off is going to be the coolant port on the rear iron. I'm afraid to tap that, drill it and tap it with this engine all put together. Put a silicone cap on that one back there and hose clamp it. It's very easy to see, so if it does leak, easy to service as well. But that's pretty much all of the hydraulics. I've got to add my coolant temp sensor for the Haltech back here. The oil pressure sensor is going to go up here in the front of the engine. The fuel pressure sensor is going to go on the pulsation dampener right there. So all of that wiring should be pretty simple. I still have to like kind of figure out a TPS setup for the slide throttles. One of my buddies used a shock travel sensor for his TPS on a slide throttle, and I really kind of like the way that that sounds, because the slide throttle is activated like this way. You know, you pull it and it slides out of the way, right? Slide throttle. So it's not the same as like a shaft mounted TPS where when you floor it, it's rolling a shaft, and then you just put some sort of a, you know, little potentiometer sensor on there, and then, you know, this, we kind of need like a linear thing. Race Pack sells a cable actuated TPS sensor, or just a cable actuated 5-volt reference sensor. You could put it on whatever you want, but I don't really think, you know, those are like $400. A regular shock travel sensor is like 180 or $200. So we can just get one of those, set it up. You'll probably not even use close to all of the stroke of the shock travel sensor, but that's okay. It'll probably look decent sitting in here next to the throttle cable setup too. So that's kind of the intent there. We got the slide throttle. Super stoked to get this thing installed on the car, but there is a significant amount of modifications that we've got to do before I can install this beautiful piece of aluminum right here. So this is a 4-barrel, not a Holly, ginormous slide throttle. Well overkill for the street rippage that we're going to be doing with this car, but we're going to run this thing and it's going to look sick. Stoked. The only issue with this is that it hits my alternator. So let's take a look. So looking at this engine from the top down, you can see I've got the aluminum intake manifold bolted on there. Y'all saw it in a previous video. It's a beautiful piece. Y'all also saw we're real close to the alternator right here. And then I told you in that video that the slides are bigger than the lower intake manifold. So if you notice here on the left, since I'm holding this, I'm not going to point, but those bolt holes to the edge of the slide there where the idle adjuster is approximately like 2 inches. If you notice down here, the bolt holes to the edge of that aluminum plate is like 5/8 of an inch. So there's a good bit of overhang on either side. So as I set this down in here, notice how much bigger the slide throttle blades are than that little aluminum flap. You can see that we don't even really line up that well with the holes and that I'm overhanging. For now, we have to modify this piece of sexy automotive jewelry, and it's got to fit with the alternator. We can't not have an alternator here with the intake. And as far as custom pieces, the intake's already custom, so we might as well make that more custom because the serviceability of it won't change if I modify it. It's still a one-off piece. Stock water pump housing, little spacer, and one custom bracket versus a full custom overhaul of the front accessory drive. You just that extra couple degrees there. So I've got some straight lines marked on everything. So we've got the clutch for the RX7 FD. This is Exedi's Hyper twin disc clutch for the FD RX7. We're not going to be converting the car over to a push style clutch, so this still utilizes the factory pull style throw-out bearing for the FD transmission, and this is a sprung twin disc. So, a twin disc clutch is a little bit overkill for the amount of horsepower that we're going to be making, but what we want is comfort and drivability on the street. So, the sprung, nice, smooth engagement, the twin plates shouldn't be as grabby, in addition to the twin disc being a little bit easier on your foot as far as pushing the clutch pedal down. The four rotor is going to make a good bit of torque, but I don't think we're going to get close to necessarily exceeding the limitations of this clutch itself. The other thing we like about going to a twin disc clutch like this is that the twin disc clutch should be a little bit lighter and it's a bit smaller. All the weight is a little bit more towards the center, and it should allow this four rotor to be a lot more snappy to get those quick revs that are going to sound super sick and also make this thing a blast to drive. I had initially planned on running Exedi's Hyper single disc clutch, which I think is something very similar to this, but it's just a single disc. It would have been just a little bit simpler for the street versus the twin disc, but I noticed something on this twin disc that my OS Geiken twin disc doesn't have, and that is on this center intermediate plate. This center intermediate plate is pretty thick to help dissipate the heat. It's kind of vented like a brake disc would be. You're going to see these little springs here on this plate, and hopefully that keeps this clutch from rattling. So my OS Geiken twin disc that I have in the Rad RX7, at idle, it sits there and you can hear it rattle. Kind of whenever you switch to a single mass flywheel in like a BMW or something. My old 335 used to rattle at idle. It's just kind of annoying when you're sitting in a drive-through, and the four-rotor street car is probably going to sit in some drive-throughs. So we don't want to be sitting there just clacking away with our twin disc clutch. In addition to, Johnny and his wife are both going to drive this car. So the pedal needs to be something that you don't have to hit leg day every day for. You can just come straight, skip your morning gym, and still drive your car. You don't have to get a good leg pump in. So pretty stoked to install this. The intakes, this looks sick. I said at the beginning of the video, I'm going to say it again at the end. I'm so stoked with how this engine bay looks. It's simple, yet effective, The JP3 Motorsports anti-gravity battery mount back here with the big breaker. Wiring is going to be super fun, and I've figured out, running 8 IGN 1A coils, that the Nexus R3, I've only got 4 high current outputs, which are the solid state PDM stuff you can use, which there's half bridge outputs and other things I can use to turn stuff on to output 12 volts without needing to fuse a relay or whatever. And I've probably lost all of you guys who watch the videos and you're like, wiring, whatever, it's not my thing, probably not going to rewire my whole car. But anyways, it's good information. So I'm going to have to set up some relays to power the coils because they are just simply an on-off. So the PDMs pull up, speed, voltage, current regulation stuff isn't really necessary to just turn 8 coils on. So I'm going to put relays on it for that, which is okay. We'll use one of the outputs on the Nexus to turn them on when the ignition turns the Nexus on. Perfectly fine. But the cool thing is we're still going to utilize all of the Nexus's PDM stuff for other functions in the car. So fuel pump, there'll be one for that. Injectors will still be on the Nexus PDM. Fans and other fan will be on the other two. So we'll be able to bring one fan on, then bring the second fan on. Or if in the future we upgrade to 2-speed fans, then we'll be able to bring one fan speed on, and then bring another one on. The air conditioning is going to talk to the Nexus, so when the AC compressor gets turned on, the Nexus will kick the fans on. So doing all of that sort of factory-like integration is going to be very fun to sort out, and that's what I've been working on. The mess that I made, though, is this. And I know Johnny watches all the videos, and I know Johnny bought this. But this is the engine harness from the FD, and I need some of this. So all of the transmission wiring that runs through the body harness comes out into the engine harness to do your reverse lights. I don't think there's a neutral safety switch, your speedometer, that sort of thing. Your temperature gauge in the dash actually runs through your engine harness. The oil pressure gauge is on the chassis side. So there's actually two separate ones. This is the engine one. That's your temperature plug-in. So I'm actually not going to take the temperature wire all the way out because it's only one wire. So I'll just extend it and run it where I want. But I'm going to take the temperature wire out of where it goes into the body harness side. So the mess I made was I am cutting up and taking some stuff out of this harness. I feel like because of how malleable this is, that when Johnny put the engine in this car and had this car fixed up, that this was a brand new harness like 3 years ago. But hey, you know, better for us to use a brand new transmission harness than to hack something together out of an old harness that then becomes a nightmare and a mess. So I'm going to make a mess of this harness. And basically this is your, you know, there's going to be a coil harness laying in here, an injector and sensor harness laying over there. They're probably going to run separately. I'm not going to have wires crossing all of this, you know. The coil wires will come over and then come down. Injector wires will go down under that and then come over here. Oil pressure, fuel pressure. I'm trying to keep everything parallel. We want it all, when you look in here, it's not messy and you can still see the engine. That's the goal. Attached to some clear tubing, attached to an adapter, attached to a thing, attached to my funnel, attached to an adapter, attached to another tube, attached to my funnel, and now I can turn it on and feed oil into the center bearing main feed areas. So it's overflowing and I gotta not make a big mess. It's coming out the rear iron. That's why it's taking so much oil. Okay. Ooh. Well, I don't see a huge puddle on the ground yet, so I guess it's holding it. Alright. It's time to finally try to start this thing. So we've got the entirety of the Tennessee Deals Gap drunks on the phone here. So everybody say hello to the YouTube video.
Hello.
You can see everybody on there. We have a whole audience. So we're going to crank this with the fuel pump off and then try to start it. So let's see how it sounds. All right, we've got oil pressure, so that's a win. Let's put the fuel pump back on. Fuel pump's connected. All right, moment of truth. It should start. Assuming we have everything correct. We had oil pressure. I'm just going to hit the key and let it kind of fire and then shut it back off. It started!